In the leafy suburbs of Melbourne, Caroline Reed Robertson was consumed by a crazy obsession with her neighbour, pretty, popular dance student Rachel Barber.
Hello, Rachel.
But she didn't want to be like Rachel Barber, she wanted to become Rachel Barber.
Rachel wasn't perfect, but Caroline thought she was. She wanted to become Rachel and become part of Rachel and take her place in our family.
As we'll see tonight, Caroline Reed Robertson's crazy obsession would lead inexorably to murder. Because in order to become Rachel Barber, she first had to kill her.
This is, without doubt, one of the most bizarre homicides that I'm aware of or have worked on. It is skin-crawling, chillingly cold, calculated murder.
For 5 years, Caroline Reed Robertson waited and secretly plotted. Then one day, Rachel Barber simply didn't come home.
I was panicking. And you think, why? Why panic? She's 15, but I felt really uneasy. I felt really, really uneasy.
I was shocked but not surprised, really, in any way. Caroline had this crazy obsession.
So you'd felt she was capable of doing that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. She was a very peculiar character.
Caroline Reed Robertson and Rachel Barber both lived in this street in Mont Albert, a comfortable middle-class suburb of Melbourne. But that's where the similarities ended.
I can't stand you!
Her parents were heading for a breakup. Caroline's home life was deeply unhappy. She was shy, reclusive, moody. How would you have described her then?
On the face of it, Caroline was fine. She had a quiet personality, but what happens inside her house is often not seen outside of the house.
Rachel Barber was the exact opposite. 4 years younger than Caroline, her home was full of love and joy. And she was happy, outgoing, athletic. Ballet was her life.
Ballet was always her first passion, and Rachel would come home at the end of the day and our whole house would be dismantled, and I just accepted that. And she'd get all her dress-ups out and she would just improvise, and there would be full-on performances.
Although they lived just 100 metres apart, Rachel and Caroline had little to do with each other. But when Rachel was 10, Caroline came over to babysit. And even then, she was already fascinated by her young neighbour. She clearly saw Rachel as the ideal person, as the person she wanted.
Yeah, and this is the whole silly thing, because if Rachel had been told that Caroline saw her as the perfect person, Rachel would have laughed about that herself. Because nobody's perfect, and Rachel wasn't perfect.
Over the next 5 years, this fascination with Rachel festered inside the troubled Caroline Reed Robertson. As we'll see, it was soon to become a fatal obsession.
I think that Caroline was very unhappy with herself. She didn't like the way she looked. She did want to take on that persona of someone that was happy, that was beautiful, that was popular, like Rachel was, and try and live that life. You and I can sit here and say, well, that's just not possible, but certainly that's what she wanted to do, and that is absolutely my belief of why she took Rachel's life.
Caroline Reed Robertson was a very unhappy teenager. Her house was a war zone. Her parents' marriage was over. She was in constant conflict with her mother and 2 sisters. Life couldn't be any more different to that of her neighbour, pretty, popular Rachel Barber.
I've got to go now. Sorry, goodbye. Hey!
Here we were, mum and dad and 3 daughters, happy. And then across the road, she has 3 sisters, mum and dad, dad's left home, family unhappy. So from that regard, she might well have wanted to wish that she could have something like what we had.
You're well suited, actually.
She certainly did. Caroline Reed Robertson yearned for the happiness and security of Rachel Barber's life. It all seemed so perfect. She wanted to be just like Rachel Barber. She wanted to be Rachel Barber.
I'm going to put my makeup on today.
Some people might change their behaviour, their appearance, their job, their lifestyles, so they can be like their role model. But to actually want to kill the role model and replace them, I mean, that's going really a long way.
Caroline's behaviour became more and more extreme. She was full of self-loathing and anger.
I don't fit anywhere in this crazy world because I am ugly.
In desperation, her mother Gail shared her fears with Rachel's mum, Elizabeth.
I had Gail crying on my shoulder. My clothes were saturated with Gail's tears for her grief over worry for her daughter. And she said, I can't do anything. I'd say, take her to see somebody. And she said, I've tried that. She doesn't want to go.
Instead, Caroline retreated into her own world, writing tortured letters to her father David, who'd since moved out of home.
Obese pizza face, white worm, massive nose, and just plain weird. I feel like a tortured, troubled soul. Signed, Spotty Dotty.
Well, sometimes you start off with a process of fantasising, and then, that compulsion becomes stronger and stronger. And then if you don't start acting on it, then you just feel this terrible discomfort. And that's what motivates people to do things that they shouldn't be doing.
When Rachel was 14, the Barbers moved to the outer Melbourne suburb of Heathmont. The family thought they'd seen the last of their strange neighbour, but they were wrong. Caroline continued to stalk Rachel, recording every moment, every feeling in her diary.
Rachel is strikingly attractive. Dancer's body, very clear, pale skin, hypnotic green eyes, wild, free spirit, passionate, charming, moody, mysterious.
We were living our lives, they were living theirs. So we were oblivious to anything that Caroline could have been planning. Rachel would have been spied on quite a few times because she was keeping an eye on Rachel a lot.
How do you feel about the fact that she was planning this for so long?
That's scary. I mean, that's scary that, she had photos of all of us girls all over her walls. I mean, that's crazy.
It's hard to know exactly when Caroline Reed Robertson decided to murder Rachel Barber. Certainly by the time she left school, planning had begun in earnest. She gathered enough information to assume Rachel's identity, including her birth certificate, and she'd rented this one-bedroom apartment in Paran. Now all she had to do was to lure Rachel here.
She was thinking about this for a couple of years, or even if she wasn't thinking about it, it was in her subconscious. One of the homicide detectives sadly said that he really honestly believed Rachel's days were numbered.
With people who lack conscience, they will see the victim as someone who, by their own fault, is in the wrong place at the wrong time and deserve what they get. If you're that naive and you fall for my trap, then that's your fault. This is the kind of logic that I've heard over and over.
In early 1999, Caroline contacted Rachel out of the blue and told her about a modelling job that could earn her some much-needed money. But Rachel's mum intervened, telling her she was too young. A few months later, Caroline tried again, only this time she told Rachel not to tell anybody.
Your mum will be fine with it when she finds out that you've got $100.
I said, you're up to something. I said, what are you up to? And it was almost there. And she said nothing. And she waited for her father, and then she was fine, and then they went off and she waved goodbye. She said, I love you at the end, and that was the morning.
It was the last time Elizabeth would see her daughter alive. That afternoon, Caroline met Rachel after her dance class. They caught the tram from Richmond to here in Paran, just 100 metres down the road from Caroline's unit. It was 6:40 p.m. Back at her unit, Caroline put Rachel at ease. She showed her some relaxation exercises. Then she attacked, choking Rachel with a computer cable.
Rachel pleaded for her life, and I think to myself, the last person she saw in this life was Caroline. And Rachel would not have been able to understand why Caroline would be murdering her. I think she would be completely... There would be no logic. There's no logic in this death.
That evening, when Rachel failed to meet her father Michael for a lift home, her family immediately feared the worst.
When Michael rang me up and said Rachel wasn't at the tram stop, I was panicking. And you think, why? Why panic? She's 15, but we knew something was wrong because she wasn't home.
When did you start to feel something was wrong?
I knew instantly. I knew, because I just had that gut feeling, because it wasn't Rachel. Rachel wasn't someone to just disappear. There's no way that she'd want to run away or anything like that. It just wasn't her. So my instinct was she was dead that night.
Rachel Barber is missing, and with each passing minute, her family's fears for her safety grow.
She's gone somewhere that she thought was legit. That's my gut feeling.
We want Rachel back. She's missed. We love her.
I felt really uneasy. I felt really, really uneasy. It was very unusual for her to do this.
Within hours, Rachel's parents, Elizabeth and Michael, organised a huge search near her dad's school in the inner Melbourne suburb of Richmond. Over the next few days, they were unrelenting, phoning friends and workmates, handing out flyers and plastering the streets with posters. But the household in those, in the first few days...
Very crazy. Didn't see Mum or Dad much at all because they were always out on the road, in the city, putting up posters.
We knew something was wrong. The police kept trying to tell us that she'd just gone off with a friend, but we knew Rachel wouldn't worry us like that.
We have grave concerns for her welfare at this point in time.
Rachel's disappearance was now big news.
She's a kid that will not go with anyone she doesn't trust.
And soon, police had a breakthrough. A witness had seen her and another girl getting off the tram in Paran. How important was that piece of information?
Really critical information. And the girl who had this sighting was someone that knew Rachel, that had been to the same school as Rachel.
With a reliable sighting, police now set about finding a link with Paran, and they soon discovered it. The night before she disappeared, Rachel took 2 calls from a Paran phone number. It was Caroline Reed Robertson's number.
Anyone, okay?
At that point, very cruelly so, Michael actually believed that she was alive. And he thought, for whatever reason it's happened, whatever reason, Rachel was with Caroline, but the important thing would be that she would be alive, that she hadn't been kidnapped, that she hadn't been raped. All the dreadful things that you could possibly ever imagine happened to your daughter, we had visualised.
When police visited Caroline's unit, there was no answer. Inside, they found her semi-conscious on the floor. Somehow, their arrival had triggered an epileptic fit. But there was no sign of Rachel.
Caroline, can you hear me?
Caroline Reed Robertson was brought here to the Alfred Hospital. And a few hours later, police were able to speak to her. What she told them in an unemotional, almost matter-of-fact way, shocked them to the core.
I asked her where Rachel was, and she responded to me that Rachel was dead. And that surprised me. And I said, are you sure she's dead? And she said, yes, I've buried her. And I said, listen, are you sure? Are you sure that she's dead? Is there no way we can help her? And she told me that she'd buried Rachel on a family country property near where she'd buried other pets.
So she confessed straight away?
Yes.
Police soon found Rachel's clothing at Caroline's unit. Photos of her adorned the walls. And there were signs that her body may have been kept there for several days. Even more damning, they discovered Caroline's incredibly detailed plan to murder Rachel and steal her identity.
There is evidence of planning. Caroline clearly planned this out. This was a premeditated murder.
This wasn't a crime of passion, this wasn't spur of the moment.
Well, it's not spur of the moment, and it's certainly not passion.
The next morning, detectives searched Caroline's family farm at Kilmore, 70 kilometres northeast of Melbourne. Here they discovered Rachel's badly decomposed remains in a shallow grave, just where Caroline told them she'd be. You've gone from missing person to murder.
Yes, absolutely.
Neil sat in front of us and he said there's no other way of saying this. Rachel's been murdered. Rachel's been murdered? We're all very calm. And I kept thinking, why couldn't Rachel have done something? Why couldn't she have thrown a chair through a window? Couldn't she have done something?
Do you remember the night when it was confirmed that Rachel was dead?
Absolutely. I can't forget that night at all. I did ask them who did it, and they told me it was Caroline. I was shocked but not surprised, really, in any way.
From here on, police struggled to get any more information out of Caroline. She was vague, unresponsive, evasive.
Caroline's very cold, very matter of fact, but just very cold. There's no emotion there whatsoever.
Calculating?
Absolutely. Calculating. It's unbelievable that she would not recall what had occurred or know that she was involved in the murder of Rachel.
Despite Caroline's almost total lack of recall, the case against her was overwhelming. There was her meticulous murder plan, her obsessive diary entries about Rachel, the fact that Rachel was strangled with a computer cord from Caroline's work. What's more, Rachel's remains were buried on Caroline's family farm. And then, of course, there was her confession.
She's dead.
On March 13, 1999, Caroline Reed Robertson was charged with Rachel Barber's murder.
Unheard of for someone a teenager to kill a younger person to steal their identity. It's basically unheard of.
I've never come across another one of those. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but they are so rare out there. Very strange.
Caroline Reed Robertson's court appearance was a deeply emotional experience for Rachel's family.
I have seen a photo of that noose. I know it could have been let go right at the very end when she said Rachel was pleading, please, please don't.
Bizarrely, after confessing to police, Caroline decided to fight the murder charge. But then, at the 11th hour, she pleaded guilty, denying Rachel's loved ones a trial and the answers they so desperately wanted.
And I wanted her to get up close to me because I know I've got my daughter's eyes. And she would have seen Rachel's eyes in me and maybe she would have remembered what she did.
Caroline Reed Robertson was sentenced to 20 years jail with a 14.5-year minimum. In his sentencing, Justice Frank Vincent said this was a difficult task because everyone had lost. But ultimately, no one had lost as much as Rachel Barber, from whom he said Caroline Reed Robertson took everything. What was that like?
I saw her hands. All I could do was look at her hands.
Why?
Because those hands murdered Rachel. And that's all I could think about were the hands.
Hello, Rachel. Doesn't she look elegant?
It's now 15 years since Rachel Barber was murdered. The terrible thoughts of her final moments never really fade. But there are so many more happy memories, and that's what her mum tries to remember.
When Rachel was murdered, her life couldn't have been better. And she was at a point where she totally believed in herself. she was doing her dancing and everything was going to be right for her.
I've got to go now. Sorry, goodbye, goodbye.